Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Theater One. Lovely to see you all. I know you have a lot of choice today, so we appreciate you coming out and see the next three amazing speakers we have lined up in this block. Our first speaker in this block is a independent developer operating under the name Roofcat, and he asks you the question whether it's useful to write your own tools, even if you make smaller indie projects. Spoiler alert, the answer is yes. Yes, of course. You can save a lot of time.
Yeah, thanks for coming.
Oh, thank you for coming. Oh, sorry, I ruined your presentation. So to talk about using tiny tools to implement characters in minutes instead of hours, please welcome to the stage Ramon Huiskamp.
All right, thanks again. Thank you for the introduction, Eric. Thank you for coming to my talk, using tiny tools to implement characters in minutes instead of hours. My name is Ramon Huiskamp. I worked as a level designer and tech designer, secretly tech designer, for Sumo Digital and No Breaks Games, and now I'm working fully independent for my own company, Roofcat, where I'm working together with 7 amazing freelancers to make a game called Escaping Atlantis, which is basically about what the title says. You're building a team of quirky Atlanteans, riding a big turtle, and doing strategic battles. So let me first start with the question of why might you not be making tools at this moment? Firstly, you may already think that you have enough things, enough tools in your engine, in whatever you're using. Maybe you're using some plugins. Why do you really need to make more tools, even if it might save a little bit of time or make something a little bit more efficient? Because making tools can be pretty daunting. It can feel like an entirely different skill set to extend your editor than to simply make things for your game. And you probably, as a little indie studio, don't have someone dedicated to just working on tools all the time. And you might not have the budget or the time, essentially, to do that. So I was very much in this situation. I had no idea how to get started on making tools for a while. Had a bunch of talks that I attended that made me very motivated to give it a try, because it always felt like tools are such an interesting thing to really save yourself time in the future. But I didn't really know where to start. So I'm going to go and open up Unity in a moment. If you're not using Unity, then the principles of what I'm going to be explaining should still apply, but obviously what I'm showing, you may need to look up some tutorials to do the same thing in whatever engine you're using. I'm also not going to comment on the Unity thing. So with that out of the way, this is Unity. If you've not seen the editor before, this is what the fuss has been about. So in our game, we've got a lot of different characters. We've got over 20 characters. All of them have a number of different things that need to be implemented. We've got art that needs to be implemented. We've got animations. We've got gameplay variables. We've got a bunch of story, a bunch of dialogue. All of that stuff needs to be put into the game. And most of the time, that doesn't even need to be put into the game just once, because every time we iterate, we may need to re-implement that as well. So it's very useful to make sure that we have some tools that can help us with this. So I'm going to start by showing something that we made in order to basically make the art implementation process a little bit faster. It's just a tiny tool, but hopefully it will give you an idea of what you can do. So this is one of our characters. Its name is Kai and Stoy, because it's 2 guys. And the way that we import our puppets, essentially, as we call them, into the engine is using PSBs. This is basically just a Photoshop file the artist set up. And it's a file format that Unity likes, so we can just import it, and it will convert all of our layers into separate sprites, which is very nice. Then we plug this PSB into the prefab that I've got set up over here. And the next step will be to assign some variables. So if I'm going to assign, I'm going to focus on this all renders variable right over here. And if I'm going to assign this manually, all I need to do is I need to lock this inspector so that it stays focused on this. It doesn't switch around to something else. Then I'm going to select all of these visuals over here, all of these sprites, and I'm going to select this extra sprite that I've got in here as well. All of the different units have this particular sprite, but it needs to be in this particular variable as well. So then I'm going to just drag it, put it in this all renders variable, and there we go, done. It's about 30 seconds of work max. It's not an incredibly complicated procedure, but it does still involve a few different clicks, a few different drags. So we can make this better. So let me show you what this looks like if I use a little tool. You can see I've got this little extra script here at the bottom. Say that just took 30 seconds. This takes less than a second. Wow, we've saved 30 seconds. That's amazing. 30 seconds obviously doesn't sound like much, but if you are implementing 20 characters. You're probably going to make 3 iterations on all of those characters. That's times 30 seconds. That's 30 minutes saved, which is very nice. That's an early lunch break. So 30 minutes is already great to save. Obviously, you're not immediately saving 30 minutes because you've still got to make this tool. So let's take a look at how complicated this tool is. As you might be able to see, I hope you can see it decently from the back. This is not a very complicated script. It's only a few lines of code. To quickly kind of give you a rough idea of what it does, it's got this execute always attribute at the top, which makes sure that its Unity functions, such as the update function, call also while you're running the editor. Then it's got this little editor setup that's actually just a Boolean. It's not really a button. I'm just kind of pretending that it's a button. And when you click it, it's going to execute this piece of code. It's going to immediately make that Boolean false, so it doesn't keep executing that line of code, because we would not want that. And then it's just going to set those variables based on all of the sprite renders that it finds in this particular script. So that's all that this does. And that's not a particularly complicated script if you have done any scripting before. Obviously, if you've not done any editor scripting, it may take you a few tutorials to get through. But let's say that that took me a maximum of about 5 minutes. Still, that's 25 minutes saved. Very nice. But on top of saving time, that also saved me a lot of mental load, because every time that I need to implement a character, I need to think about all these separate steps that I have to do in order to get every variable filled up, to get everything in there. And every step that I can reduce from that process, every step I can remove, is basically making it less of a mental chore and makes me dread having to implement characters much less, which is nice. It also reduces the chances for user error, because if I'm implementing this myself, I might select a bunch of stuff over here and then make a small mistake, miss out on a sprite, and I would not really realize that until quite a bit later in the process, and then we would figure out that there are some problems. If we're using this tool, then that's going to just always do the same thing for every character. And so as long as that tool does what it's supposed to, then it's going to be consistent every time, and that's going to be very nice for me. So this is a very small tool that you can get started with, but there are a lot of other small manual things that need doing when we're implementing our characters. So let me show you something that is a little bit more, looks a little bit more like what we're actually using in the game. As you can see over here, it's the same workflow for me implementing the character. I've just got to click this one thing, and that is going to do, it's going to fill this all renders variable. It's just also going to do a bunch of other stuff. This is going to look maybe a little bit less fun. I have to give a small disclaimer. I'm a game designer that learned how to program. So any programmers that are cringing at the moment, I apologize. Please don't throw anything. But this is just basically what this script is doing. It's doing the same thing I was doing before. It's just setting that one all renders variable. It's just now also setting a whole bunch of other stuff. It's also setting a number of variables over here. It is here, it's editing a lot of different animations. Every character has their own animations, and we've got to make sure that there's some animation events in those animations. And that's just something that always needs to be done the exact same way. So there's no real point doing that manually every time if we can just automate it. And you may have also noticed that this is now a button. Oh my God, it's not a Boolean anymore. That's just this little bit of code. Once you are basically using a tool more frequently, you can spend a little bit of extra love in it, make it look a little bit nicer and a little nicer to interact with. So as I said, the workflow is just going to be the same. I'm just going to click this, and that's going to fill up this all renders variable. It's also going to fill up, if I unlock this over here, it's also going to fill up a bunch of data over here that I need for some of my scripts to function. It's going to do a bunch of other stuff that I'm not going to show you because it's too much. But all of this is still just less than a second. It's just one click, and it just takes care of all of these things for me, which makes me happy. So that's just a very small tool that you can use for your art implementation process. But there's a lot of other aspects of our characters that we need to work on and that we can use tools to improve. So over here, I've got these scriptable objects. This is something inside of Unity that's basically just a data holder. So we can add a bunch of variables to these, and then I can use these for the start of the game. This is what is basically going to represent what our units can do. So this particular character has a health of 16. It's got a strength of 3. And I can change that right now in here. That's totally fine. But this is a strategic game. So I want to balance all of these variables based on each other, essentially. And if I want to balance this character based on this character, then, sure, I can go back and forth. But I can't easily select more of them at once. And I definitely cannot select a whole bunch of them and then edit all of them at once. So that's not ideal. And in order to improve on that, we can create our own little editor window. So over here is a very straightforward, very basic editor window where I just grab all of these scriptable objects and I display all of the strength and all of the health that they have. And now I can just edit it directly in here. So if I edit this over here, you can see that that's immediately changing it directly in the scriptable object. And now I don't have to go back and forth between different windows. I can just use this one window, compare the different characters, and make the changes as I want. So that's very nice, but what it also allows me to do is actually change all variables of all different characters all at once. So if I want everybody to be stronger, I can just press this strength button a few times, and now the entire balance of my game is broken. But this makes it so much easier to edit everything and yeah, basically just have an overview of what's going on with all of these different stats. Obviously, this is another tool that we have to make, so let's take a quick look at how complex that is. If I quickly hide some stuff to make it seem less complex. So this is basically the overview of this tool. So it's inheriting from this editor window class. That's something that Unity has set up for you to make editor windows. That allows me to call this menu item attribute. And that basically, you can see that that's called window-editor, unit editor small. And that means that when I go to this tab called window, and I go to unit editor small, that's going to basically create this window. And essentially how that works is it just calls this function show window. In there, it creates the window, and then it calls a function I have created myself, a little setup function that grabs all of these scriptable objects for all of these units and gets them in a way that I can edit them. Then it will just have this onGUI function, which for some reason people call onGUI. I don't understand it, but they call it that. This onGUI function, and there I have to do everything in the order that I want this to be drawn. So I start out with all of these buttons. If you press any of these buttons, it's going to change some variables over here. Then it's going to go through all of these scriptable objects, apply those changes to those scriptable objects, and then finally it's going to actually list through all of the units. It's going to basically just like grab their name. It's going to say this is the strength of this character, and then it's going to display that in a way that I can edit it. So that's obviously that might take a little bit more time to get into that than the first little tool that I made, but this is still a fairly small, fairly easy tool to get set up. And once you've kind of got used to making a little tool like this, you can also iterate on it, similar as I did with the tool that set the all renderers variable. So if I go over here, I can show you something that's a little bit more, also a little bit more like what we're actually using in our game at the moment. So this is our unit editor, and this allows us to do the same thing that the little tool that I showed just now can do. It can change the strength, it can change the health, it can change a bunch of other stuff, but it also allows me to go to all of these different tabs. These are basically skills that characters learn as they level up. This is a bunch of barks. These are basically a bunch of different texts that they've got. A bunch of story-related stuff. We can even assign a bunch of the art assets in this tiny, well, I want to say tiny, but I have worked on this for a while, in this little tool that I made. And you can see over here, it's even got that prefab that we were implementing the art in earlier. And because this is my own tool, I can change it however I want. I can, for example, I can make it that I can only see a few characters, and I don't have to see everybody. I can just compare a few characters to each other and then change the stats based on that. And I have a number of basically buttons over here that can execute something that will just affect all of these characters. You don't have to understand what all of these do. Most of these I use maybe once or twice, but it's still very valuable for me to turn this into a function that I can call and also very easily revert, rather than having to go through all of these units, make those usually identical changes, and then realize that I want it to be one strength higher for everyone. That's just, it's frustrating, and this makes it so much easier and just saves me so much time and mental energy. So that is a little bit of an idea on how you can make tools. Very short, only have 20 minutes. Want to leave you with a few considerations. Hopefully, I've motivated you all to be super excited about making your own tools. But before you go about it, I just want to say, please don't kill your engines. Please don't make make so many editor scripts that it slows down to run it in about 3 FPS, because that's not fun when you're trying to make a game. That's even more of a thing to consider when you're working with a team, of course. You've got to make sure that whatever you're working isn't negatively affecting your engine. Also good to keep in mind that if you're planning to make a really big tool, there are some plugins that are out there. A lot of people have already made a number of tools for Unity, so some can do what you want. If you are either stubborn or you just have a very particular thing that you want, then it's still very valuable to make your own stuff. And finally, if you make tools for others, then you really do have to care about UX. You saw a bunch of my tools may look a little bit ominous with a bunch of boxes and a bunch of booleans and things that you don't entirely understand what they do. For me, that's not as much of a problem because I'm the main person that uses this, and the only other person that uses this is someone I communicate with daily. So that's not as much of a problem. I should probably still improve it. But if you're working in a bigger team and your tool is going to be used by people that you maybe not see every day, you've got to make sure that everything's really clear and basically that people are not scared to use your tools, because if they are, why are you making tools for them? So takeaways are very straightforward. If you're not making tools, I would very much recommend you try it out. If you've got the ability to basically make stuff happen within the game, then you can probably, depending on your engine, also make it possible to actually extend the editor itself. As I've shown, you can start really small with some really small tools that can already save you, even if it saves just a few seconds. If you do that process long enough, then a few seconds can really come down to a lot of time, many hours. But you can also iterate on those tools. I would say what I did here is not always the way to go. You don't always want to make a huge tool that takes care of everything, but you can do it. You can do it to take care of a lot of different problems for yourself. And finally, tools can do more than just save time. They can also save you a lot of headache trying to implement things, and they can actually make a lot of things feasible that otherwise simply would not be editable for either your designers, your artists, someone who maybe not as deep into the engine. And finally, the more you're working on making editor extensions, you basically get better at it as well. So it's a process that becomes more efficient as you go on. So that was my talk. My name is Ramon. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me on Twitter. And if you wish to escape my lines, that'd be very nice. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ramon. We do have time for some questions. And the last bit went so quick, so fast. What did you say? Wish list, my game?
Yeah, so it's this game called Escaping Atlantis. You can find it on Steam, and you can wish list it.
That's it.
So that's the final point of the talk.
So, questions for Ramon. Let me throw this thing, guys.
See a question over there?
Oh, over there. All the way in the back. Thank you. Hold on. All right, there you go. I think we lost the mic.
Yes, thank you for the talk. What are some ways for people that are not so involved with programming and stuff to come up with the incentives for other people to make tools for them? For example, artists who are importing a bunch of textures or a bunch of 3D models or something, to come up to a developer and say, yeah, could you make a tool for this?
Yeah, no, when I was working at some bigger studios, I also very much noticed that being a problem, because a lot of people that are not programming don't know what might be possible for such tools. So the difficult thing is that other than you learning what's possible, the next best thing would be basically asking your developers, asking the people that might know it, probably regularly, because at first they'll be like, you've just had to do that like twice. Writing a tool for that, it's going to take me an hour. Just do it. And then if you ask them next week and you're like, hey, I've had to do it like 10 more times. If you spend that hour making this tool for me, then this is going to save me a whole bunch of time in the future. You can also, if you've got a producer, they like saving time. So you can basically poke them a lot and then convince them that this is going to save you time. And then they'll fight for you.
Thank you.
All right. Do we have another question? That is wrong. Okay. So if there's no more questions, Ramon is still going to be here around. You can ask questions if you see him on the hallway. Thank you, Ramon.
Thank you.
Please stick around.